The shuttle had come down in the eastern draw, between the chalk ridge and the second canyon wall, and whoever had been flying it had done a reasonable job of not dying. The wreckage was spread across maybe 40 meters of pale stone, nothing on fire, the main hull still more or less intact against the boulder that had stopped it. I found it the way you find most things in the Highlands. I smelled the fuel first, then I heard the metal pinging as it cooled in the morning air, and then I came over the ridge and there it was. I was 3 days into a 5-day solo resupply crossing. The forward post at Kelvassar had been waiting 2 weeks for a medical kit restock, wound closure strips, anesthetic, blood volume expanders, imaging cartridges, and the shuttle route had been grounded since the Vrethosavar pack claimed the eastern corridor 2 seasons ago. The pack, for those unfamiliar, they are roughly 3 meters tall, 6-limbed, and territorial by blood scent, which means they track by what you leave behind rather than by sight. My commanding officer had drawn a line on a topographic map, told me to keep to the chalk uplands where the wind would scatter my trace, and sent me off with a full pack, a field kit, 2 days of extra rations past what I'd need, and a sidearm I hadn't drawn from its holster in 4 years. That was the arithmetic of the situation before I found the shuttle. After the arithmetic changed. She was pinned under the forward strut, not severely. The strut had come down across her lower legs rather than crushing them, and she'd been working to free herself before she passed out. I could tell by the scrape marks in the chalk around her hands and a worn patch on her boot heel where she'd been pushing against the ground. She was Velketh, which I knew from the bone structure and the secondary joint configuration at the shoulder, a branching articulation that reads wrong to human eyes, like something dislocated, until you understand the species. The secondary joint is distinct from the primary shoulder socket and connects to the wing musculature that the Velketh use for thermoregulation and some communication. It's not a flight wing by any functional measure, but it is load-bearing in a physiological sense, and damage to it cascades. She had a laceration along the left side of her skull where it had struck something on impact, bleeding but not arterial, the kind of wound that looks alarming and is usually manageable if you get to it. Her left arm was at the kind of angle that meant the primary shoulder joint had separated. The secondary was bruised, possibly strained at the connecting tendon, but the joint itself was intact, which mattered because intact secondary joints mean the wing musculature is still anchored and the thermoregulatory system is working. And in highland conditions, thermoregulation is the difference between a hard situation and a fatal one. I got the strut off her legs using a pry bar from the shuttle's own tool kit. I worked carefully and without rushing because the geometry was bad. The strut was balanced against a secondary piece of hull, and moving it wrong would have shifted that piece onto her. It took 11 minutes. I checked the time because 11 minutes is the window before a Velketh goes into volume shock from a head wound of that size, and I needed to know how much I had. I had about 3 minutes left when the strut came free. Her legs, nothing broken, deep bruising on the left, surface abrasion on the right. She'd be moving under her own power in 4 to 5 days if the tissue recovery rates in my field manual were accurate for her age and condition. I checked her airway and positioned her head. I reset the primary shoulder joint. She didn't wake for it, which was a mercy, because resetting a dislocated Velketh shoulder without anesthetic is not something I would have wanted her to experience consciously. The joint architecture is similar enough to human that the technique transfers, different enough that you have to feel for the second click, not just the first. I felt both. I packed and taped the head wound with a compression dressing. I wrapped the secondary wing joint in the sterile liner paper from 3 field dressings. The backing is thicker than it looks, and layered and folded correctly, it provides enough rigidity to hold the joint stable without restricting the musculature. I used a strip of medical tape to secure the outer layer. It was the best I had. Improvised medicine is still medicine if you know what you're doing. Then I sat back on my heels and looked at the situation. She needed to be off this plateau before dark. The Vrethosivar pack had claimed this corridor, and the laceration on her head had been bleeding for at least 2 hours before I found her, which meant a scent trail from wherever she'd crawled before losing consciousness. Blood reads loud to a pack that tracks by scent. The forward post at Kelvassar was 2 days' march in the direction I'd already been heading. The shuttle had no functioning communications. I checked the panel, the emergency beacon, and the secondary transmitter, all dead in the impact, and my personal comms were line of sight only until I cleared the second canyon ridge, which was half a day away. The woman was unconscious and weighed, by my estimate, about 60 kilograms. I have carried 60 kilograms before. Field medicine involves carrying things, equipment, patience, the knowledge that you are the only one present. I have carried a dying Marine 4 kilometers through open terrain to reach extraction. I have carried a child out of a collapsed structure with one arm because the other was occupied holding a bag valve mask. The weight was manageable. The terrain was not ideal. The combination was going to be hard. I did the math. I started packing. I redistributed my kit, moving the heaviest supplies, imaging cartridges, fluid packs, to the lowest position in the pack to shift the center of gravity. I built a carrying harness from my spare webbing and a length of the shuttle's cargo strap that had survived the impact clean. I used the crash seat's lap restraint as the chest piece and tied everything off in a configuration that put her weight across my upper back and shoulders with her legs hanging forward on either side of my hips, her arms folded across her own chest, her injured arm secured in a half-sling made from a triangular bandage so it wouldn't swing and aggravate the reset joint. I padded the contact points with folded gauze. The secondary wing joint I protected with my spare undershirt, folded twice and tucked against it to stop the harness straps pressing on the bruised tissue. I tested the whole rig against the shuttle frame before I put her in it. It held. I ate half a ration bar standing up, drank 200 milliliters from my canteen, checked the compass heading against the topographic map I knew from memory, and lifted her into the harness. She moved with the fluid looseness of the genuinely unconscious. I adjusted the straps, settled the load, and started walking. She was unconscious for the first 4 hours. The Kelvassar Highlands in the 4th month are bright and cold and still. The chalk plateau north of the eastern draw is the kind of terrain that looks simple from a map and punishes you for believing it. The footing is reliable on the chalk itself, pale and even and almost lunar in its smoothness, but the wind comes off the upper canyon without warning, and the temperature drops 8 degrees in 20 minutes when the sun goes behind the ridge. I have made this crossing twice before, once in the 2nd month and once in the 5th, and I know its rhythms well enough to respect them and not so well that I'm ever careless. This crossing was harder than both previous ones. I am a medic. I am not an infantryman, and I've never tried to be one. What I have is the particular endurance that field medical work builds. The ability to keep functioning when your hands are shaking, to keep thinking clearly when you haven't slept, to keep doing the next thing, and then the thing after that without stopping to assess how you feel about any of it. Carrying a 60-kilogram person across highland chalk in a wind that wants to push you sideways is different from that, but it pulls from the same place. You find what you have when you need it. I stopped every 40 minutes to check the harness, check her pulse, check the dressing on her head, check the secondary joint padding. The liner paper was holding. Her pulse was steady and stronger than I'd have expected given the impact she'd taken, which was a Velketh physiology thing, and I was grateful for it. The skin at her temples and the back of her neck, the places where Velketh thermoregulation shows on the surface, was warm and consistent. The secondary joint was anchored. I was doing everything right. I kept the pace slow and even, adjusted my gait for the wind, and did not let myself think about how far I still had to go, because the distance doesn't change based on how you feel about it. She woke in the late afternoon, when I had crossed the first saddle, and was descending toward the chalk basin below the second ridge. I felt it before I heard anything from her. There is a quality to the weight of an unconscious person that is fundamentally different from the weight of a person who is conscious and simply still. When she came to, something in her shifted, not movement, just awareness, and the 60 kilograms became something different, something with intent in it. Then she said something in Velketh that I didn't understand, but that had the unmistakable cadence of profanity, specifically the kind of profanity that means, "Where am I? What has happened? And why does my body feel this way?" "Still here," I said. "Don't move the left arm." A pause, the pause of a person taking inventory of their situation and finding it strange. "You are carrying me." "Yes." "Where are you going?" "Forward post at Kelvassar." 2 days east. I adjusted my grip on the webbing straps, shifting the load slightly to rest a different set of muscles. "There's a medic there with better equipment than I have. Your shoulder needs imaging. I reset the joint, but I can't verify the articulation without a scan. The head wound is packed and clean. The secondary joint is stable." Another pause, longer than the first. I could feel her processing. Velketh have a particular kind of stillness when they're thinking, something I've observed in the 3 previous patients I've had from the species, and she went into it fully. "How long?" she said. "Since this morning. About 5 hours. I found you approximately 2 hours after your shuttle came down, by my estimate." She went quiet again. I crested a small rise in the chalk, and the wind hit us both from the northeast, and I lowered my head and kept walking. She said nothing for another 10 minutes, and then, "You reset the shoulder." "Yes." "Without waking me." "You were unconscious. The window for a clean reset in a Velketh primary joint is narrower than in a human joint. The musculature starts pulling after about 2 hours and makes the return path more complex. You were already at the limit of the window when I found you. I took it." She made a sound I couldn't interpret. Not pain, not contempt, not gratitude. I filed it and kept moving. The chalk basin was empty and wide, and the light was going amber by the time I reached the flat ground and found the section of overhang I'd marked on my mental map. An east-facing rock wall with a good 3-meter shelf of stone above it that cut the wind and left the ground below it dry and sheltered. I had planned to camp here regardless of what else happened, and arriving with a passenger made it more important, not less. I brought us down carefully, harness off one strap at a time, my weight taking hers until I had her seated against the wall with her back supported and her injured arm resting across her own lap. Then I let the rig go. She was pale in the way Velketh go pale under stress, the undertone in their blue-gray skin shifting toward something ash and thin. But her eyes were clear and tracking, following my hands as I unpacked the camp kit. I set up the heating element without speaking. When it was running, I handed her a meal pack and sat down cross-legged to eat my own. She looked at the meal pack. "Eat it," I said. "I don't know your specific dietary tolerances, but the protein-to-glucose ratio in these is close to universal, and your body needs both right now. You lost blood and you've been unconscious for 5 hours." She ate it slowly, as if testing each bite, but steadily. I watched her peripherally while I worked through my own meal and updated my mental map. 2 days to Kelvassar from this position, the second canyon crossing the hard variable, the Teth Varon bridge the gate. Manageable. Tight, but manageable. When I looked up, she was still watching me. "You haven't asked," she said. "Asked what?" "Who I am, what I was doing on that route, what the shuttle was." I thought about it. "No," I said, "I haven't." "Why not?" I looked at her across the heating element. Her eyes in the low amber light were doing the Velketh luminescence thing, catching what was left of the day and holding it in the iris. It is an involuntary feature of the species, and it reads more intense than they intend it to. She was not trying to intimidate me. She was genuinely asking. "Because it doesn't change anything," I said. You're injured. You're on the Kethosavar Plateau in Vrethosavar Corridor Range. I'm the medic who found you and I have a route and the equipment to cover it. Your identity is your business. My job is to get you to the forward post in a condition where better resources can take over." She looked at me for a long moment. Then she looked at the empty meal pack in her hands. "All right," she said. I cleaned and redressed her head wound before the light went entirely. The bleeding had stopped, and the compression dressing had done its work cleanly. The tissue beneath it was already showing early consolidation, which confirmed what the recovery literature said about Velketh healing rates. I reinforced the outer layer with a strip of medical tape I'd been conserving in the bottom of the kit for exactly this kind of situation. She let me work without comment, without flinching, sitting still with a quality of patience that was either discipline or exhaustion or both. I told her I was going to do a check on the secondary joint, and she nodded and held the position I asked for, arm down, shoulder relaxed, chin level. I palpated along the secondary connecting tendon, and she remained perfectly still through it. There was swelling, but the tendon was intact, and the joint wasn't tracking hot, which meant the bruising was superficial rather than deep tissue. I added a second layer of liner paper to the padding and resecured it. "Better," I said. "Yes," she said, "it is." We slept in shifts, 3 hours each. I took the first watch. The plateau at night in the 4th month is a particular kind of silence, very large, very cold, very complete, the chalk ground losing the day's warmth quickly, so that by midnight it is reflecting the cold back up at you, and the stars overhead are brilliant and near and completely indifferent. I sat with my back against the overhang rock and my field kit across my knees and listened to the dark. Halfway through my watch I heard, from the direction of the eastern draw, a sound I recognized. The Vrethosavar contact click is not a call, not quite. It does not carry the same way a territorial call does. It is lower, more rhythmic, made by the secondary mandibles rather than the voice, and it functions as a coordination signal, the kind a pack makes when it is triangulating on a position and sharing the triangulation data with other pack members simultaneously. I have read about it in the corridor assessment documentation, and I have heard it once before, at distance, on my second crossing. This time it was closer. I heard it twice, 4 minutes apart, once from the south and once from the south-southeast, which told me they were in spread formation and moving northeast. The scent trail from the shuttle crash site. They had found it and they were following it. I did the math. At the rate they were moving, tracking rather than running, they would reach our position sometime in the next 20 to 24 hours. That was a workable window if I adjusted the morning start time. I had been planning to leave at first light. I was now planning to leave an hour before. I woke her for her watch at the 2-hour mark instead of 3. "Company," I said quietly when her eyes opened. "From the south, pack formation, tracking, approximately 20 hours behind us at current rate. I've recalculated the start, we move before sunrise." She was entirely awake. Not gradually, not slowly, but immediately. I noted that and filed it with everything else I was learning about her. She sat up and took the watch position against the overhang without complaint, and I lay down and was asleep within 2 minutes, because you learn that on the job too. Sleep when you can and don't waste time getting there. She woke me exactly at the time I'd asked. The pre-dawn on the plateau was dark blue and very cold, and she was sitting exactly as I'd left her, watching the southern approach with the steady, unhurried attention of someone who has been trained to watch things. I built the harness in the dark by feel, because I'd built it enough times now that my hands knew the sequence. She held herself correctly for being loaded into it. Weight forward, head level, arms folded, the injured arm across her chest. We started moving in the last of the pre-dawn dark, with the chalk pale beneath us and the stars still overhead, and the second ridge a black cutout against the not-quite night sky ahead. The second day was harder than the first. partly because I'd slept badly and the morning cold was in my joints before I'd fully warmed up, and partly because she was conscious, which changed the mechanical nature of the load in ways that are hard to describe precisely. A conscious person does not simply hang. She was compensating, constantly, shifting weight when the terrain shifted, bracing when I braced, leaning into the angle I was angling into. It helped with the gross balance of the thing. It also meant a kind of continuous micro-movement that I had to account for rather than predict, and accounting for something is more tiring than predicting it. We found a rhythm by mid-morning. I would tell her what was coming: step up, lean right, crossing loose chalk, hold still for 5 seconds, and she would follow the instruction without questioning me or hesitating. It was efficient, more efficient than carrying a person usually is. She was good at being carried because she paid full attention to being carried, and I have worked with professionals who couldn't say the same. She asked questions during the flat sections, when I had breath to spare. How long have you been a medic? 11 years. In the Federation Forces. Field contract. I'm not commissioned. I stepped around a section of scree and found the chalk on the other side. I hold a Class 3 medical certificate and a Highland corridor clearance, and I contract to whoever needs field medicine in areas where the forces don't maintain a permanent presence. Is that common? Common enough. The forces have more corridor kilometers than they have personnel to cover them. She was quiet for a while, then, is this, she paused, selecting the word carefully, is this the kind of thing you do regularly, finding people? No, I was resupplying Kelvassar. You were a detour. That sound again. I was starting to understand it better. It was not contempt. It was not amusement exactly. It was something with both in it. Dry surprise at a thing she hadn't expected to encounter, filed without sentiment. The pack, she said later on the long flat approach to the northern basin. Can we outrun them? No. Can we hide again? Possibly. Once. There's a fault in the second canyon wall that I used on my previous crossing, and I believe it's still accessible. It masks scent well because the chalk is dry and fine particulate inside the crack. If we use it once. They'll backtrack to the position after they miss us, and they'll find the entry point. And the bridge. The Teth Varon Bridge is at the end of the second canyon descent. If we reach it before they close the gap, we cross out of their claimed corridor. They won't follow past the bridge. It's a territorial boundary, not just a physical one. There's a second pack on the western side that they're in active dispute with. They won't cross into contested ground. And if we don't reach the bridge in time? I thought about the honest answer. Then we use the fault in the canyon wall and buy another 8 hours, and hope the track assessment I made last night is correct about their speed. She was quiet for a moment. You have contingencies? Yes. You made them last night, while you were on watch. It's what watch is for. She said nothing more for a while. The chalk was smooth beneath us, and the wind was from the west now, which was better. It would carry our scent away from the southern approach rather than toward it. I adjusted the compass heading slightly to take advantage of the wind direction, and felt the load shift as she matched the adjustment. We stopped at midday to eat and check the dressings. Her head wound was clean, the compression dressing doing exactly what it was supposed to do. The shoulder was stable. She could move the forearm and wrist without significant pain, which told me the reset had held and the joint was tracking correctly. The secondary was still anchored. I changed the outer layer of liner paper on the secondary joint because the old layer had compressed during the morning's walking and the padding value had decreased. She watched me work with the same quality of attention she brought to everything else. At some point she said, "You carry your kit very carefully." It's a field kit. I can't resupply it until I reach Kelvassar. That's not what I mean. I looked at her. You handle the components like they matter individually, she said, not just as tools. I thought about how to answer that. They do matter individually, I said eventually. Each item has a specific function and those functions aren't interchangeable. The liner paper is not the same as the tape. The tape is not the same as the compression dressing. They look like a pile of supplies. They're actually a sequence of decisions. She studied me for a moment. Then she looked away across the chalk plateau. Where did you train? Durvan Station, 3-year program. Then an 18-month Highlands specialization at Keth Vasset before my first contract posting. Durvan is a military facility. Yes, the civilian certification program runs alongside the military track. Same curriculum for the first 2 years, different placement stream at the end. I chose the contract stream. Why? The chalk was flat here and the wind was down, and I had enough breath to think about the answer rather than just produce one. The military stream means assigned postings. You go where they send you and you treat who they tell you to treat. The contract stream means I go where the work is, and the work is wherever people are in places that don't have coverage. I looked at the horizon ahead, the second ridge a pale line against the sky. Most of the people I've treated in 11 years would not have had access to a military medical unit. They're in corridors and frontier posts and field positions that aren't prioritized for force deployment. She was quiet for a while. Then, the forward post at Kelvassar, how many people? 7. A geological survey team and 2 communications officers. The nearest commissioned medical facility is 6 days away in good conditions. And they wait for you to resupply them. They wait for me to resupply them, I confirmed. She said nothing more until I packed the kit and rebuilt the harness. But when I helped her back into the rig, she held herself for the loading with a small additional deliberateness, a precise economy of movement, as if she had thought about something and made a decision about how to carry herself in light of it. I noticed. I didn't comment on it. The second night I found the fault crack in the canyon wall, a horizontal opening in the stone face about 2 meters off the ground, accessible by a short scramble that put pressure on her shoulder, and which she absorbed with a sharp exhale and a jaw set and nothing else. The crack was wide enough for both of us to lie flat, which we did, side by side, my pack between us and the outer wall to reduce the profile of our scent signature from below. It was cold in the crack. I gave her my spare insulation layer, and she took it without argument, which told me something about her practical sense and also something about how she was feeling, because people who feel fine argue about whether they need insulation. We lay in the dark and I went through my equipment check by touch, a habit I have maintained since my first year in the field, every camp, every bivouac, regardless of how tired I am. If you check it while you're still functional, you don't discover a problem when you're not. Everything was in order. The dressings were in the side pocket. The secondary joint liner paper had 2 usable layers left. I had 1 meal pack remaining and half of one in the canteen at about 40%. Manageable. You're doing an inventory, she said. She'd heard the sound of the kit being worked through in the dark. Yes. You do it every night. Yes. A pause. Does it help, knowing exactly what you have? I thought about that. It helps me sleep, I said. If I know precisely what I have and precisely what I need, the gap between the two is manageable or it isn't. If it's manageable, I can sleep. If it isn't, I need to fix it before I sleep. I closed the kit. It's almost always manageable. She was quiet for a while after that. The chalk dust in the cracks smelled clean and dry and old, the smell of stone that hasn't seen weather in a long time, and it was very dark, no starlight reaching us at this angle, only the cold and the dark and the distant sound of the wind across the canyon rim above. What do you do when it isn't manageable? She said. Find another option. And if there isn't another option, then I decide what the priority is and I work to that and I stop thinking about what I can't change. A beat. There's usually another option. She lay still beside me in the dark for a long time. I could tell she was not sleeping from the quality of her breathing. Eventually, I have been conducting this survey for 3 months. I told no one what I was looking for. I waited. The Highland transit corridors have not been updated in 40 years. The official maps show routes that are no longer viable and do not show routes that have developed naturally through use. My mother's house administers this territory, and the outdated maps are causing injury to survey teams, to traders, to the people who live on the plateau fringe. A pause. I told no one because if I told anyone it would become a formal project with formal oversight and formal reporting requirements, and it would take 4 years. I thought I could do it in 1. Can you? I said. I could, she said, before the navigation fault. I thought about what she was trusting me with, in the dark of a chalk crack above a plateau with a predator pack somewhere south of us. The survey data from the shuttle, I said, is it recoverable? A brief silence. Why? If the shuttle's navigation system failed but the survey recording systems were independent of navigation, which they often are, because survey data is worth more than the shuttle that carries it, then the data you've collected over 3 months may still be in the shuttle's recording core. I could note the crash position accurately. If a recovery team reached the shuttle before weather or the pack compromised the hull, the core might be intact. The silence that followed was longer than the others. The recording system was independent, she said. Then I'll note the position accurately in my incident report. She lay still for another moment. Then she said, "You are a very thorough person." "I'm a medic," I said. Thorough is the baseline. The Vrethosavar at close range are not quiet. They have size and confidence, and the particular noise of a predator that knows it is the apex entity in its environment, which means they do not particularly try to be silent. What I heard was the click and step of a pack in spread formation covering ground at a trot, the coordination clicks passing between individuals at intervals, and then a single extended pause of about 30 seconds during which I heard nothing at all and knew they had found our ground position below the crack. I was not breathing, she was not breathing. Then the clicks again, moving, northeast. Adjusting to the new angle of the scent trail, which was old here, hours old, which meant they knew we were ahead of them and not below them, and they accelerated. I heard the step pattern change from tracking trot to covering pace. 6 sets of feet by the sound, moving fast. The sound faded. Neither of us moved for another 5 minutes. Then she breathed, one long, slow exhalation that she'd clearly been holding for most of the 6 minutes they were close. "That was close," she said, very quiet. "Yes." "How did you know about this crack?" "Previous crossing. I note positions. Anything that could be useful: shelter, water, sight lines, scent mask opportunities." "You were planning to use it." "I was planning to have it available," I said. "There's a difference." She was quiet for a moment. Then, "No, I don't think there is. Not for you. You plan to use things you identify. You just leave yourself the option of not needing them." I didn't know what to say to that, so I said nothing. After a while she slept again, and I lay awake in the chalk dust dark and listened to the distant sound of the pack continuing northeast and thought about the morning. The third day. The chalk plateau ends 4 kilometers before the bridge, giving way to a section of broken basalt and scree that drops toward the canyon rim in a series of switchback descents, each one requiring care, each one carrying the additional variable of altitude-induced wind shear that comes off the canyon below. It is the hardest section of the crossing under normal conditions. Under the conditions I was working with, carrying 60 kilograms on a harness built for a crisis and not for sustained technical terrain, it was the hardest thing I'd done in 11 years of field medicine. I pick every step on scree. I have learned through error that scree respects no assumptions, and the price of an assumption is a twisted ankle or a dropped patient, and neither of those was acceptable. She had understood this by mid-morning of the previous day, and she understood it now without being told. She held herself very still during the difficult placements and let me place my feet and settle my weight before she adjusted hers. We were not speaking much by the third day. We had run out of things that needed saying and found a working silence that was more efficient than conversation. Twice I had to stop on the descent, brace against an outcrop, and wait for my legs to stop shaking. Not from weakness, from sustained load across terrain that requires constant micro-adjustment, which is a different kind of fatigue than simple effort. The muscles don't fail, they demand a pause. I gave them the pause. She said nothing during either stop, only held still and waited, and when I said quietly, "All right," she held herself ready for the next section. That understanding, offered without commentary, without sympathy, without the kind of hovering concern that well-meaning people offer, and that constitutes its own kind of weight, is rarer than most people know. I have worked in close quarters with a lot of people over 11 years, and I can count the ones who understood that kind of silence on one hand. We were 2 hours from the bridge, on the final descent toward the canyon rim, picking a line across a section of loose basalt where the footing was unreliable, and the exposure was significant, and the wind was coming up the canyon in strong, irregular gusts, when she said it. I had just placed both feet and steadied myself, and I was calculating the next 3 placements, running the line in my head, when she said, "Do you know I'm a princess human?" I stopped. Not from the words exactly. I had made some inference about her status by the second day, simply from the quality of her presence and the composition of the shuttle, which had been a private configuration, not a standard survey vessel. What stopped me was the way she said it, not proudly, not as a claim or a challenge. With the flat exhaustion she'd used for everything over 3 days, as if the words had been accumulating weight, and she'd finally decided they were too heavy to keep carrying separately from everything else I was carrying. "No," I said, "I didn't know that." Second daughter of the Kethosavar sovereign house. A pause. The wind came off the canyon and she tilted her head slightly against it, a Velketh thermoregulation response. I was conducting a personal survey of the Highland transit corridors. There was a navigation fault in the shuttle that I had been told was corrected after the last service inspection. Another pause. It had not been corrected. "I see. My mother will have search vessels in this corridor. They have been searching since yesterday morning at minimum. She would have had the departure time and the planned route, and she would not have waited 12 hours before initiating." A longer pause. "I wanted you to know who I was carrying across her corridor." I stood there on the basalt with her weight on my back, and the canyon below us full of golden afternoon light, and I thought about what she was telling me. The rank was information I could use. If her mother's vessels were searching this corridor, they might reach the bridge crossing at approximately the same time we did, which would mean immediate medical handoff rather than another day of field improvisation. That was useful, but that was not all she was telling me. She had not told me for 3 days, not when she woke on day 1 and confirmed I was carrying her, not during any of the conversations on day 2, not even in the fault crack the previous night when we had been close enough that she could have whispered it and I would have heard it clearly. She had chosen this moment, on the hard terrain, in the wind, 2 hours from the bridge, to say it. And the reason she had said it now rather than at any of those other moments was not because she'd forgotten it or decided it was irrelevant. It was because she had been deciding something, and she had finished deciding it. "Thank you for telling me," I said. "Does it not?" She stopped, began again. "Does the rank not matter to you?" "For the search vessel timeline, yes. It matters considerably." I shifted my grip and found the next placement and started moving again because the scree does not care about conversations. Past that, no. You were injured and alone on a plateau with a predator pack tracking your blood scent. That was the situation. The rest of it was your business. She said nothing for a full 30 seconds. I covered 6 meters of basalt. The wind shifted and I adjusted. "What's your name?" she said. "Vale Sond. Corpsman Second Class Field Contract Medical Kethosavar Corridor. Class 3 Certificate Highland Clearance 11 years in service. She said it quietly once veil as if making a note. You should be commissioned. I'm not interested in being commissioned. Why not? I thought about the honest answer. The work doesn't change, the paperwork does. The patients are the same patients, the terrain is the same terrain, the kit is the same kit. The commission adds a reporting structure and a title, and it doesn't change any of the things I'm actually doing. I found the next section of stable ground and settled into it. I prefer the work. You prefer the work, she repeated. Yes. Another silence. The canyon rim was visible ahead of us now, the edge of the stone, and then nothing, and then the far wall 300 meters away. And the light in the canyon itself was a deep, clean amber that came up rather than down, reflected off the pale canyon floor far below. It is one of the stranger visual phenomena on this crossing, and I always note it. When this is over, she said carefully, I would like to file a formal record of service on your behalf with the Federation Medical Contracting Authority. That's not necessary. I know it isn't necessary. I would like to do it. All right, I said, because refusing a formal record of service on principle is foolish, and I am not a foolish man. We reached the bridge at what my internal timekeeping said was approximately 40 minutes before sunset. The Tethvaron Bridge is a rope and plank construction that dates from the original establishment of the Highlands Survey Corridor, maintained on a seasonal schedule by the Transit Authority. It is 40 meters long, 3 planks wide, suspended on 4 main ropes with cross-roping at half-meter intervals. I have crossed it twice before. I know it takes my weight. I was less certain about it taking mine plus 60 kilograms, but I had made the structural assessment 2 days earlier when I planned this route, and I had concluded that the main ropes had the load capacity and the planks were sound throughout. I had decided to cross. I had not undecked that decision. She held very still during the crossing. I mean very still in a specific sense. She controlled not only her own movement but her breathing, taking measured shallow breaths that minimized the shift of her ribcage against the harness and reduced the swing-inducing micro-movement that a swaying bridge amplifies. She had thought about this in advance, probably sometime in the past hour, and had worked out what she needed to do and was doing it. The bridge moved considerably in the first 10 meters where the approach ropes are longest. It steadied in the middle section. It moved again in the final 10 meters. I kept my pace even and my center of gravity low and did not look at the canyon floor 40 meters below and crossed in 4 minutes and 20 seconds. On the eastern side, I brought her down out of the harness the same way I'd been bringing her down for 3 days, one strap at a time, my weight taking her through the transition, easing her to seated against the canyon wall. I checked the head wound, the shoulder, the secondary joint. Head wound clean, shoulder tracking correctly. Secondary joint stable, maybe better than the previous day. I gave her the last of the water from my canteen and told her to drink all of it. She did. I was repacking the harness, old habit, you stow things when you're done with them when I heard it. Not the Vrethosavar. Something else from the east. The low-layered throb of atmospheric drives in descent configuration. Then the lights came over the eastern ridge in sequence. 3, 4, 6 of them, bright and fast. The approach lights of descent craft doing a high-speed search pattern that shifted to landing configuration as they spotted us. She made a sound, a different sound from any she'd made in 3 days, not the dry surprise sound, not the sharp exhale of pain, not the steady controlled breathing of someone managing themselves across bad terrain. Something underneath all of that. Not quite relief, not quite grief. Something that had been waiting behind all the other sounds for 3 days and was only now coming out because the situation had finally allowed it. That's them, she said. Yes. The descent craft were coming down on the plateau above the canyon wall, bright washes of light sweeping down the cliff face and across our position. I could hear voices, Velketh voices, calling, moving toward the bridge approach. She looked at me. The landing lights from above were coming around the canyon rim and illuminating the cliff face in moving bands, and she was lit in it clearly for the first time in 3 days, not in low light or chalk dust dawn but fully, and she looked exhausted and composed and like someone who had settled something internal that had been unsettled for a while. "You should come with me to the compound," she said, "to be properly assessed and to receive." "Kelvassar still needs its supplies," I said. "I'm a day behind. I need to make up the time." She stared at me. "You've been carrying me for 3 days. And now I'm not." The situation changed. I got the pack settled on my shoulders and adjusted the straps. "The head wound will need to be looked at by someone with imaging capability within 48 hours to confirm the consolidation is proceeding normally. The primary shoulder joint should be scanned to verify the seating. I believe the reset is sound, but I can't confirm without a scan. The secondary joint needs monitoring for 3 days for late presentation deep tissue involvement. It's currently clean, but that can develop over time." I looked at her directly. "Tell your medical team those 3 things in that order." She looked at me for a long moment. The Velketh voices were at the bridge now. I could hear the planks beginning to move under the weight of the first-person crossing. "You are a very strange person, Vale Sand," she said. "I'm a medic," I said. "I'm exactly what I should be." I turned and started west along the canyon floor. She called after me once, not my name exactly, a word in Velketh that I didn't know and filed for later. And I did not stop, because if I had stopped I don't know what I would have done with 3 days of carrying and the weight of whatever the weight had been. And the resupply had to get through, and Kelvassar had been waiting long enough. I crossed the Tethvaron Bridge west again at dawn, when it was empty. The chalk plateau in the early light is the color of old bone, pale and clean and indifferent. The Vrethossavar pack had passed this way in the night. I could see the track marks in the fine surface chalk where they'd come back around the fault position and moved east, then stopped at the bridge boundary and returned. They had not crossed. The territorial instinct holds even when the quarry is close. I noted that in my mental map and kept walking. There was a formal communication waiting at Kelvassar when I arrived on the morning of the 6th day, relayed through the post's long-range receiver. The Sovereign House had been in contact with the Federation Medical Contracting Authority. A record of service had been filed. There was a line at the bottom of the communication that said, "The secondary joint assessment was exactly correct. No late presentation involvement." And the shoulder reset held. I read it once. I filed it. I unloaded the medical supplies, signed them into the post inventory, wrote up the incident report, and noted the Vrethossavar pack activity with a recommended update to the corridor risk assessment. I noted the Tethvaron Bridge condition: serviceable, load tested, adequate for emergency use with 60-kilogram additional load in moderate wind conditions. I sat in the forward post's narrow common room that evening with a cup of poor tea and thought about nothing in particular for a while, which is something I almost never do, and which probably meant something. You carry a lot of things over 11 years in field contract medicine: equipment and knowledge and the arithmetic of the situation, the margin and the distance and the rate. You carry what the work requires. When the work ends, you put it down. That is the job. That is what the job demands and what makes it work. I had put it down. I had finished the crossing, delivered the supplies, filed the report. The work was complete and the patient was in better hands, and I had done exactly what I was supposed to do, which is all you can ever ask of yourself. That is what I tell myself. In the early mornings when I'm on the chalk plateau, and the light is doing that particular amber thing and the wind is from the west. When I think about the Kethossavar eastern draw and the harness built from webbing and cargo strap and an improvised liner paper secondary joint support. And a woman who held very still on a swaying bridge, because she had thought about what was needed and done it without being asked. A word in Velketh, called after me in the canyon dark. I looked it up eventually. in a language reference that took me 2 months to locate. It means remembered.